The following podcast is presented for informational and/or entertainment purposes only, with no intent of determining a psychological diagnosis or as a substitute for treatment. If you or anyone you know is struggling with mental health and/or substance abuse issues, call the SAMHSA National Helpline, 1-800-662-HELP, 1-800-662-4357. Learn more from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration online at www.samhsa.gov. Engaging Minds is brought to you by Daranaut Health, addiction coaching and private in-home rehabilitation. Your life, your home, your recovery. Daranauthealth.com.
Hey, I'm Dr. G, and welcome to Engaging Minds. Every podcast, I like to look at our world from a deeper and more psychological point of view. Many patients come into my office, and the first thing they say is, Dr. G, I don't want to talk about my past life. And I always say to them, talking about your past life is only relevant in how it deals with your present and your future life. And that kind of statement is really I hear it all the time from people who have suffered PTSD. There is this fear about going into the past because there is this sense of, I am going to basically feel like I'm going to lose my mind and go crazy if I go into my trauma in a very powerful way. So I tell people, you know what? Go into your trauma very slowly and very carefully because we don't want to re-traumatize you. So a friend of mine who is not afraid of talking about trauma and PTSD is Tonya McKenzie. She is the founder of Sand and Shores Public Relations and Leadership Firm, the author of A Child's Memory of Cartoons and Murder, which addresses non-combat PTSD, predatory behavior, generational dysfunction, and domestic violence. And she enlightens us by telling us her personal story. She's also a Los Angeles County Commissioner of Alcohol and Other Drugs and co-host of Morning Coffee Podcast with Lieutenant Gia Neil of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. Tonya, that's just a few of your accomplishments, and I want to know, did I miss anything in introducing you?
I'm a mom of 4, and one of those is a set of twins. I am a survivor, okay? So any other...
I was going to say, is that the greatest PTSD?
That's it.
That's it. Okay. Well, you more power to you for doing all that. Tonya, in your book, Child's Memories of Cartoons and Murder, you talk about traumatic events that happened to you as a young girl. I wonder if you can share that with our podcast listeners and also tell us what inspired you to tell your story.
What I've learned, not only from my story, but those of other people around me, is there is nothing more powerful than a true story. Like, as creative as we can get with fiction, there's nothing more powerful than what someone else has been able to go through and overcome. So I told my story mostly to be able to put on record what happened, right? And also, because I made some changes to resolve the trauma, I wanted my children to be able to understand what that looked like and why I did that. I always think that when people write their stories, it may be therapeutic for the person that wrote it, but it's really a solution for other people that have gone through or will go through something like that. I witnessed my mom being shot and her boyfriend murdered at the age of 5. We spent time in a federal witness protection program. After that, most people only hear about that on TV, right? And from there, we wound up spending some time in a homeless shelter. And I've had over 21 addresses. By the time I was 18, I was sexually assaulted by my uncle, and then again in college. Both of them took place when I was asleep and woke up to some traumatic things happening. So looking at all of that and still being able to accomplish what I have as an adult, I'm married 21 years now. You know, I look at that story and I had to think, there was another boy that was there with me that morning. So my mom's boyfriend, his son was also there. When I started writing my book, I actually took the time to find out what had happened to him, and he's doing time in prison for triple homicide. It made me look at how trauma and violence begets violence. So I really wanted to write about that and show how we can overcome, and we don't have to be a statistic.
That's so interesting that you mentioned that, because one of the things I think about all the time as being a clinical psychologist is why do some people overcome their trauma and are able to turn their lives around like you have, and why do other people sort of have this inability to face their trauma? And what you're saying is it's basically the same trauma that you both faced, and yet you were able to overcome it, and this other gentleman was not. And it actually sounds like it pretty much destroyed his life. So as you thought about it in your life, are there any specific attributes that you think are important for people out there to entertain if they're trying to overcome trauma?
I started doing the research for the book and ran into Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris and the work that she championed with ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. Most people are able to overcome their traumas depending on their surroundings. So if you are in an environment that fosters resilience and an environment that does not re-traumatize you regularly, you can see the light at the end of the tunnel. You do wind up recognizing that you're not worthless, or life isn't just this thing that happened to you. But a lot of that work came out of studying ACEs while I was writing the book, just to recognize, wow, that thing that a person did was so kind, and how that played a role in my life. So I highlight a bunch of, I call them angels on earth, because they were just kind people doing nice things because they were the right thing to do. Many of them not even knowing what had happened, whether that's a coach that just made sure I got home safely, or a neighbor that made sure we got fed, or, any number of people that are surrounding you in your community that are just good people. And it's important that I think we surround ourselves with that kind of support.
I couldn't agree with you more. I do a lot of work in drug and alcohol rehab. And one of the things I tell patients, and a lot of patients come in because they have been traumatized, and the way they've learned to cope with it is through drugs and alcohol. And we have to change that experience for them, because people don't change through like an intellectual process. Like you said, they change because they're having a different experience in life.
On top of the fact that we're an emotional being, like, we have to acknowledge the fact that we are emotional. We need to be needed, and we need other people. And I know there's a lot of people that would say, no, I got this, I can do this, I can make my own decisions. But we are influenced heavily by our emotions. And that's something that we have to acknowledge. And breaking away, getting ourselves out of those situations that can consume us, can be very difficult, because that's a place, even if it is toxic, that we have felt belonging. And that's part of who we are, is wanting to feel like we belong. So we don't want to remove ourselves from this toxic environment, because at least we know that somewhere we belong. So I get it that it's hard, but it's what you have to do to survive.
Well, Tonya, I was dealing with a woman today, and she's going through this really messy divorce. And one of the things I kept stressing to her is that she has to surround herself with positive people, people that care about her, that can help her go through the process, because she is a survivor of abuse. And because of what's going on in her relationship, it is causing her to re-experience and re-traumatize herself. So I couldn't agree with you more. Our environment is very powerful, and the people we surround ourselves with is extremely important if we are to recover from any kind of abuse. Tonya, oftentimes I've had patients come in and they're dealing with drug and alcohol abuse, and I've come to understand that there's a big connection between PTSD and drug and alcohol abuse. I wonder what your thoughts are around that.
I think trauma is usually a part of drug and alcohol abuse, along with some type of mental illness or other addiction. There seems to be a connection. I don't exactly understand what it is, but even working through my book, I had a conversation with my father because I was looking for some answers. And he was honest with me. We've developed an honest relationship. Dr. G, he couldn't even stay sober the entire time we were having a conversation. But he let me know that. At the same time, I'm thinking, this is the base of the issue. And everyone that I know that has dealt with childhood trauma, when they get to the root of the problem, there's some type of addiction and there's some type of mental illness, whether it's depression or unresolved trauma from someone in their childhood. It continues to plague not only them, but then generations beyond that, unless it's resolved.
Again, I couldn't agree with you more, because in my experience, when we're looking at addiction and trauma, it's a very complex picture. So sometimes it's a chicken or egg situation. Is the mental illness, exacerbating or causing more of the trauma? Like someone may have a personality disorder or suffer from severe depression or could be bipolar. And that's, again, making the trauma worse. Or has the trauma come along, and heightened the mental health issues? So it's hard. A lot of times people come to me and say they want a simple solution to a very complicated process. And what I feel it is putting together this dynamic that comes together. We have to look at everything. We have to look at someone's culture, someone's social environment, how they grew up, what issues they're facing, traumatically, maybe from their environment. And that's how we try to understand them. But I want to add one thing that I truly believe in. We have to learn how to separate the person from the illness, that we're looking at an illness and we can't say, and that's including trauma, that that's the person. We have to try to, like you said, be empathetic towards the person and caring and loving, and understand that is this illness, this situation that's causing them many times to behave the way they do. So to me, that's very important. I always try to find the real person in the illness or in the trauma.
A lot of times I've noticed that comes from being able to identify triggers. When you can see a person's change based on a situation or a thought or a memory, you start to recognize their triggers, and then you can reverse engineer what the problem is, or what has them drinking, or what has them running to the drugs. But again, that is acknowledging the problem. And sometimes that is where the fear comes from. If my trauma or my trigger is thinking about a family event, because then I think about my uncle who was someone that assaulted me, let's get down to the base of what causes some of these things. A lot of times it's the trigger, but then tracing that back and finding the problem that we need to solve.
Yeah, the trigger, it's a journey and it's a puzzle that needs to be solved, and finding out what those triggers are can be very difficult. Like you said, a lot of times I know with drug and alcohol addiction, the first step of the 12-step is admitting you have a problem. That can sometimes take people years, unfortunately, to get to, and is the hardest step to take, is someone acknowledging they have a problem. And you got to work through all those defenses. And a lot of times those defenses of acknowledging you have a problem are there because of traumatic experiences. And you got to be careful with triggers when you're dealing with someone, because if you push too hard, you're going to re-traumatize them. But if you don't push enough, they're going to stay in their denial. So I always say I've got to finesse my way through it. But again, I think I wish I could say to people there were simple solutions to complicated problems. And I actually think socially that's part of the issue we're facing right now too, is we keep trying to find simple solutions to very complicated problems. One of the things that you talked about a lot is how important it is to have certain attributes and able to survive. And you've done a lot of work with leadership training. And I always wonder about that too. Like, what is it that makes someone, in the same vein of having positive attributes, what are the attributes that are important to have to be a powerful leader?
Leadership is understanding that your experience qualifies you to be in the room. Many times people think I'm unqualified or I can't speak on this because they don't have a certain degree or some certain credential. But your life experience and ability to be able to navigate and find solutions are incredibly important. Most importantly, I think, is being able to acknowledge a problem, right? So even if it's in your own life or in a business that you're in, we can talk ourselves into circles. People meet to meet these days. But being able to actually acknowledge the problem and verbalize it so you know what it is you're trying to solve, whether it's in your personal or professional life, is a huge factor for me in leadership, because people are afraid of the truth. And the truth is the problem that needs to be solved. Again,
The truth is exactly why people are coming to see you. They're needing leadership to be able to deal with truth. So if you're not willing to deal with the truth within yourself, how are you going to inspire other people to do the same?
and part of that is knowing that it's okay to acknowledge it, what the problem is, and it shouldn't hurt anybody's feelings. Like, that's one thing that shouldn't be emotional, is this is where we're going wrong. This is the track we're going down, and it's leading us down a darker path. This is the thing that we're implementing that's causing more problems instead of solutions. So I think acknowledging the problem is a really big deal, and understanding that your experience in life has qualified you to be in some of the rooms that you're in, and we have to get out of our own way in thinking that we're not qualified to lead.
I agree with you completely. A lot of times when I deal with clients, who have certain issues, they'll come to me and say, help me find someone. Like, I'm thinking of someone today. It was a funny story again this morning. He said, he needs to lose weight. He needs to go to a dietitian. And he said, Dr. G, if you send me to he's like a 50-year-old man. He goes, if you send me to some 21-year-old girl who has, a 20-something inch waist and tells me about the food groups, I'm going to kill you. What I want is a guy in his 50s who's chubby, has been struggling his whole life with food, and can tell me about his personal experience and how he's dealt with it. So yes, the person has the training, but you're right. That personal experience, that truth you bring to it is what makes you, in some ways, really powerful. So our vulnerability is what makes us powerful. And people need to understand that. Whether we're dealing with trauma or leadership, what I'm hearing today is it's about courage. That we need to have the courage to be able to tell the truth, whether it's dealing with trauma or being a leader. And that is an acquired strength.
And being able to deliver results. So like you're saying, your friend wanted someone that has delivered results, not someone that was born thin and ain't never had to struggle for anything, someone that can deliver the results that they're looking for. And it has to resonate with them. So being able to show how your solution resonates with someone else is pretty important to getting them to follow your lead.
I agree with you. And that's what I love about your book, Tonya, is it took so much courage to be able to tell that story, and also to inspire people about the success you've become, so they can see that, you don't have to be a victim of your past. You can actually overcome it. And there are people that have done it, but you've got to integrate those experiences and let those experiences work for you and not against you. So Tonya, if people wanted to find out more about your work and what you've done or how to contact you, how could they do so?
I'm pretty easy to find. Tonya McKenzie PR on all social media platforms. And Sand and Shores, sandandshores.com or Sand and Shores on all social media platforms. I love to connect and help people figure out what's next steps for them, whether it be in leadership, in their personal or professional life. It's important. We all need to do that.
I couldn't agree with you more, and you've been an inspiration in my life. You've helped me do that. So again, I want to thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
If you or anyone you know is struggling with mental health and/or substance abuse issues, call the SAMHSA National Helpline, 1-800-662-HELP, 1-800-662-4357. Learn more from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration online at www.samhsa.gov.